The most interesting game from round 3 of the Sinquefield Cup was Hikaru Nakamura against Alexander Grischuk. Before I go on with the game, remember, if you like this channel and you want to subscribe, then click the button, it's free to subscribe, and click the bell if you want instant notifications of when videos are posted. And if you want to support the channel, then do check out patreon.com PowerPlayChess and help us keep the lights on, basically. Right, without further ado, Nakamura opened with the king's pawn and played a gioco piano. Very popular at the moment at top level chess. I think one of the reasons is because it doesn't really have forcing variations, and I think that was probably Nakamura's idea in this game, that he wanted to bring Grischuk into positions where he had to think hard, where there aren't prescribed lines, because Grischuk is a real time pressure addict by his own admission. Now here there are basically two ways of playing. You can play in the traditional way with d6 and get these long maneuvering games, or you can play d5 as Grischuk did in this game. And this is a more ambitious move for black, because obviously you can see after this, black breaks in the center and now has greater space in the center. Why does white allow this? Well, it means that white has counterplay against the e-pawn and can sometimes break out himself with d4. So black has to be careful here to keep things under control, and that's basically the whole theme of this game. Bishop g4, good move. Pinning. Now, if white wants, you can actually take a pawn in the middle of the board here. But this is very risky. This leads to a kind of position you might see in the Marshall Gambit. But in this case, with the pawn on g4, that leaves white's king in a very drafty situation. So clearly black has excellent compensation there. So knight d2 from Nakamura, and this is the standard move. But now knight b6 is a good move, hassling that bishop. Bishop b5, you want to keep that bishop of course, and also maintain protection of the pawn on d3. Bishop d6, the bishop drops back, that's a prudent choice, keeping hold of the pawn on e5. And knight e4. So you can see that white's pieces have activity here. It's actually a very popular position. And f5 here is a computer recommendation, and this has been played in many games. And the game could develop like this. And this has proved to be quite a reasonable position for black. But instead, Grischuk, after a very long think, played rook e8. And this has also been seen quite a lot before. And here I don't like Nakamura's move. He played bishop g5. I think white has to kind of stir up trouble in this position in any way he can. So I think a4 is an interesting move. And this has been seen a few times before. And then to bring the rook into play along the fourth rank. So it's a bit weird and wonderful, but sometimes that rook does have influence over here, sometimes just stopping off at c4 to hassle the c-pawn as well. In any case, bishop g5 played, and as I said, I don't like this, and the reason is that in this position I think it's hard for white to break out, and he needs to break out here. For example, after d4, then that knight hops into d5, and if we can get a second bishop, it doesn't look great. This rook needs to come into play quickly, but it's not so simple. Nakamura played knight g3. In fact, this position has been reached before in a game between Carlsen and Aronian. And here Carlsen broke with d4. The game eventually ended in a draw, but black is absolutely fine here. I mean, one possible idea is to take exchange on g3, and both players have a slightly damaged pawn structure, but black's pieces are stronger here. That knight on c4 is very troubling for white. So Nakamura played c4, so this is the first kind of new move of the position after 17 moves. The idea is clear: to prevent the knight hopping back into the position by controlling the d5 square, and that's very reasonable. But I like the way that Grischuk reacts here. First of all, he plays the bishop to b4, hitting the rook, which wants to stay on this semi-open file, and then he puts the bishop back on f8. The rook is slightly awkwardly placed on e2. b3, we're coming to a critical moment in the game actually, because if white gets the chance to break with d4, then this knight could possibly come to d4, and there could be pressure on the pawn on c6. So Grischuk's next move is very important. He played c5, an excellent move, preventing d4. Now you might think, double pawns, particularly the pawn on c5, could be weak. But actually it's very, very difficult for white to attack this pawn. For example, the immediate move, knight e4, runs into f5, and if this is taken, then f4 wins a piece, the bishop moves away, and this can be taken. So if white can't take that pawn, then basically I think black has the better position in the long term, because black has a space advantage. This pawn in the long term is weak, and black has the two bishops, which don't look very strong at the moment, but actually they do a very good job of supporting black's centre, as we're going to see. And these knights never really find good posts. This is the problem. So white has to try and break out, but very difficult to do that. Queen e1 played by Nakamura. Now you have to keep your head if you're playing black here to try and maintain this nice space advantage. If white can play queen a5 to hit those pawns, then that would be unpleasant. So of course a5 shuts that down. It wasn't possible to take here because of rook d1 winning a queen. And after this, then this simple idea, we've seen this many times. The a pawn advances, and now there's a second weakness, the pawn on b3. So two weaknesses here. Black's only problem in this position is the knight on b6, which is not well placed. If this knight reaches a better square, then black is definitely doing very well. Nakamura plays knight d2. Now, one of the reasons for doing this is to introduce the possibility of playing f4 to break the position. But it's very hard to get this break in successfully. But this will be white's chance. Of course, once the position opens, there are pros and cons for that. The bishops might work better, but these knights need better squares. So here, for example, f4, does it work here? Well, black is better in this position. After exchanging, this bishop comes out to d6. Remember, there are two weaknesses here, and this rook has the possibility to enter the position on the open file. So here, rook a1 is not bad, but this endgame is actually very promising for black. It's that bishop here looking at the weak pawn on d3, and once that knight comes into the game, then black is doing extremely well. Nakamura waits. And I like the way that Grischuk plays this. Very responsibly. He could move forward with f5 straight away, but instead he makes sure everything is very solid. All his pieces are nicely placed in the center. Black protects the pawn on c5. On all these turns, f4 is possible, but it never really helps white. And now finally, Grischuk brings the knight back into play. So this is key to the position. And again, another possibility, another chance to play f4. But here, that just brings the knight to this excellent square, and you can see that black's pieces are beautifully placed attacking the pawn on d3. King h1. So Nakamura is waiting. King h8. I think he's basically waiting for Grischuk's clock to tick down, and then hoping in time pressure to somehow break out or introduce complications. Finally, Grischuk gets to play f5. Of course, he's wanted to do this for ages, but he just makes sure that the conditions are absolutely right. And here, after f4, that's really the move you want to play to block that f-pawn. But g5 is powerful. It's a typical tactical hit here. Black wins a piece, forking these two. So Nakamura is still waiting. Bishop c1, waiting for his moment to strike. Here, Grischuk should play queen b6, which basically threatens c6, pushing the knight back and taking here. And in that way, he keeps control. Instead, he made an inaccuracy. He played knight f6. It's the move you want to make. But here is where Nakamura missed his chance. Usually in these kind of positions where one side is trying to keep control, there is always one moment where you have a chance to break. And this was it. And I think Nakamura missed his moment. He could have played f4 now. So this blocks the f-pawn. And it might mean that this bishop gets into play. So for example, after e4, looks powerful because there's a pin here, but in fact this this idea of bringing the bishop into play is quite strong. Here's the basic idea, that after these exchanges we exchange off that dangerous knight, and here black's bishops simply aren't very well placed. You can see here that bishop is locked in for the moment, and this one as well. And white should be fine there. Of course, there are alternatives after f4. You know, maybe knight e4 is possible, but this is definitely the moment for white to strike. Instead, Nakamura played knight c3, and his chance has gone. After this, queen b7 hits the pawn. Nakamura defends, and now g5. And this shuts down counterplay. And after this, Grischuk is in complete control. f4, never possible. And Nakamura just has a really passive position. And Grischuk, he plays very responsibly, taking his time. The knight, remember, on b6, it was dreadfully placed, but it's managed to move into a beautiful position. Here's a crunch moment. You don't want to exchange on g3, but instead c6. If knight h5, then black is in control here. Knock the knight back, and then we take on d5. Two bishops, big center, targets to attack. Black, clear advantage. Nakamura put the knight back on c3, and now knight f4. That's the 40th move. Grischuk reached the time control, and he's still in complete control of the position. Crucially, these knights do not have outposts. it's a beautiful squeeze. And here, knight takes pawn. Grischuk thought for half an hour before taking that pawn. Had to be very careful. He is a careful player. He understands the tactics extremely well. In fact, there's no way for Nakamura to exploit that pin, and black is basically a pawn up. So for example, rook d2, just e4, and black has a beautifully centralized position. That bishop doing a very good job in the corner of supporting the knight on d3. Knight e2 played. Grischuk steps out of the pin. And I like the way that Grischuk plays this game. He doesn't allow any counterplay. He plays very responsibly. And basically he's a pawn up and still in total control of the position. Okay, he's won a pawn. Now he hits the other one. And here Nakamura goes into, well, you could say blitz mode. He gives up a second pawn, looking for counterplay. And just to activate that rook. Again, Grischuk a little bit short of time, so that's what Nakamura is counting on. But in fact, the Russian handles the position very well. So he's preparing to play rook e7. And yeah, just to get rid of that rook on the 7th rank, and then he'll crawl forward again. Remember, black is 2 pawns up now, and there's a possibility to go for a third here. So as I said, Nakamura in blitz mode, and he played h4, trying to stir things up, but actually, well, now it's 3 pawns, and Grischuk handles it very well because he now sees another possibility to actually prise open white's king position. First of all, let's get rid of that active rook. Good idea. Now, if the rook checks, the king comes up, and then black will be attacking on the king side. We can play bishop f6, bring the rook over. Very unpleasant. Therefore, Nakamura exchanges. But somehow after this, well, it's difficult to make suggestions for white in this position. It's not good. h3, excellent move. So using that double pawn very well. So if king takes, then queen e6 check, and then you can take on c4. So pawn takes pawn instead, but queen e6 is still an excellent move. And Grischuk very, very careful here. Position repeats, but queen g6, good move. And now the light squared bishop. This is the key to this position. This bishop, after white's light squared bishop was exchanged way back on c6, doesn't have an opponent, and this is the one that causes white enormous trouble. So there are basically 3 targets here. Here, well, actually 4, including white's king. And now white cracks because queen g3 check is threatened. So after this, well, it's not a good position. Back to 3 pawns, and black in complete control. And Grischuk now simplifies down to a completely winning bishop endgame. This isn't too difficult. 3 pawns up, and it's just a question of breaking through into white's position, and Grischuk achieves that. Let's see how he did it. And he just had to make sure that this endgame is winning, which of course it is. This wasn't the game continuation, I'm just showing how you'd win. And here, key move, h5. And either white takes that and that one goes through, or white takes that and the king comes back for that one. A little bit of calculation involved, there always is in technical positions. So instead, Nakamura took here, but now it's easy to force white's pieces backwards. Okay, I'll just go to the very end of this just so you can see what happened at the end, but basically there is no way out. And here Nakamura resigned. Let's see. Black wants to play bishop f4 basically, and if e5, then we come back and take the e-pawn. Very convincing game. There was only one moment when Nakamura had a chance to break free, and having missed that, it was all downhill. Excellent win from Alexander Grischuk. But I have to say, I was disappointed with Nakamura's play. His opening was not very impressive. It was as though he was playing with the black pieces from very early on. After the opening, Grischuk had a space advantage and 2 bishops. What's not to like? So after 3 rounds, there are 4 leaders in the tournament: Aronian, Carlsen, Mamedyarov and Grischuk, all on 2 points. It's a very tight tournament, and still a very long way to go. Do check out my earlier videos of the tournament if you're interested. There's some great stuff by Carlsen, of course, in the previous round. And yeah, it's going to be a very exciting tournament. Thanks for watching.